Well, summer turn is here. Now that move out is complete, you are realizing you needed to order more replacement furniture. So what do you do now? ASU Furniture has you covered. Formerly known as Appalachian University Systems, AUS has been supplying universities and off-campus housing with great furniture for almost 30 years. They know the unexpected happens and keep inventory in their Birmingham, Alabama facility of many of the basic pieces like mattresses and beds that you need in your furnished apartments. Look them up at theausway.com. Again, that's www.theausway.com. And if you are a developer planning out your next student housing project, AUS is set up with in-house designers that can work with you and your architects to make sure the design concepts are extended to the feel and look of the furniture as well. Again, check them out at www.theausway.com. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. This is your host, Wesley Deese, and joining me today is special guest co-host, Chad.collins. Chad, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Wes.
Well, I've had a lot of folks tell me that over the past year that, they're really interested in understanding what's going on in the construction world, why our price is going up. And you and I know each other from a project that I'm consulting your company on, and wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, Chad, who's somebody that we should talk to about what's going on with pricing and what's going on with the tariffs that the current administration has put in place and how that's impacting things. And you immediately came up with Giny Knudsen with CEI out of Nashville, who they've done a lot of student housing, and kind of timely when we started discussing this, she sent out a letter to her clients letting her know about what's going on or what has happened over the past year in regards to pricing and things that that developers need to consider. So that's our interview today, and we'll get to that in just a second. But really quick, Chad, kind of give us a background on. Obviously, you're working for University Housing Group based out of Roanoke, Virginia. You live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you're their vice president of development and construction. But give us a little bit of background on your background.
Sure. I've been in construction for over 20 years as a general contractor, education and civil engineering, and started when I was right out of high school building custom homes and really working on site with the labor force, building houses, and went into more industrial construction after that. And then later, after college, went to work for some larger commercial construction company. Spent 10 years there as a project manager, building convention centers, schools, all types of different projects. And then about 15 years ago, I got into the multifamily market, and I was vice president of construction for a developer out of Charlotte, and built market rate multifamily apartments throughout the Southeast there. Later after that, I started my own company doing construction management and consulting. And that's how I met Wes Bradley and University Housing Group. So I worked with Wes as a consultant for a couple of years from about 2015 to 2017, and then joined the company as vice president of development construction back in 2017. So right now we've got a project we're finishing in Knoxville, Tennessee. And we've got two projects that we're getting started this year, one in Reno and one in Chattanooga.
Yeah. So, you've seen kind of all the different industries and have really kind of seen the industry and ups and downs. As far as what we're in right now, have you ever seen anything like it in regards to the pricing jumps that we've had over the past year?
No, I haven't. This is definitely the worst I've seen as far as price increases go at any point. It's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from the recession back in 2010, where there was no work to be found. Now we seem to have the opposite effect of there's so much work going on that, we've got issues with labor. We've got the tariffs and other issues causing price increases. But no, I would say this is the worst we've seen as far as price increases, and really, no end in sight from what we can see right now.
Yeah. So, and a couple of things we get, into with Giny and our interview with her, and so I'll save some of that. But lumber alone, since September of 2017 until the time of the recording about 3 weeks ago, which was kind of the 1st of July, I guess, 47% increase in lumber, which is just, and, she, I think mentioned to me, or maybe it was you that said, hey, it's probably going to be another 10% before the end of the year. I don't pay a lot of attention to construction pricing, but that was just something that blew my mind. I mean, anytime you've got that type of an increase on any type of product, obviously that's going to put some strains on things. But here at the same time in this, in this country, we're seeing, a continual kind of bounce back from, the Great Recession, and we've got a lot of projects that are going on. So you've got this increase in materials from both steel and lumber. And then on top of that, you've got, which impacts everything. But then on top of that, we've got a labor issue. And you forwarded me an interesting article, which I'll put in the show notes so that others can go look at it. But, the trades, and we've talked about this on this podcast before, there's a huge shortage in that. And just for our listeners, kind of give a summary really quick on what's happening with the labor force and why that's, kind of creating this trifecta, perfect storm on construction costs right now.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is just the amount of projects that are being built across the country. We made reference to the recession, and one of the things that happened is when the jobs started falling off and guys needed a place to work, they left the construction industry to go to other industries or other trades. And now that the construction boom has come back, a lot of those guys have not come back, guys and girls. And from this article, it looks like there's around 140,000 vacant construction positions nationwide. And, one of the problems is in a lot of cases, you can find labor, but you can't find skilled labor. And, a lot of that goes back to our schools and just the younger generation not looking at construction as a viable career option. So that I think that has a lot to do with it. And then, like I said, just the number of projects that are being built and labor shopping from one project to the other. And you think you've got your labor figured out, and the next thing you know, they're packing up and moving to another project to make a little bit more money. So it's a continuing problem.
Yeah, I mean, some of this is reading the tea leaves, and I hope our country, it kind of recognizes this. But those trade positions and the trade schools that are out there, producing that skilled labor, in some states, I know that there's been, a huge push with that, and it's creating, it's given a lot of folks options that they didn't have before. But I don't see the entire country really grasping that just yet. But I really hope if you're listening to this podcast and you're in the student housing industry, you really need to be looking at some of those trade schools. Like, WyoTech is one that comes to mind. And I've got kind of a personal background with that because I worked on a project in Laramie, Wyoming, where both the University of Wyoming is at, as well as WyoTech has their home base. And the property was about a 500 bed property, and it was pretty much half and half. And of course, WyoTech didn't have any on campus housing. And, we were replacing a lot of carpet and a lot of furniture because, these guys were breaking down motorcycle engines on their dining room table and on their coffee table. And, a lot of people are talking about, stay in tier 1 and the larger schools. And because a lot of people are having you have to be very strategic in smaller schools to really make sure that the right relationships and the right location is in place in order to be successful and sustainable in those markets. I would really encourage developers to look at some of these trade schools as well, because they need help with that. And they're not. I don't think they're large projects, but if you can purpose build something that speaks to what that student is going through. For example, going back to Ohio Tech, what would have made a lot of sense is a building that included some garage space that could be rented out or be part of the public amenity space, so that they could go in and work on these projects that they're working on. And so I would really encourage developers, take a look at that, because I feel like there's going to be, in order to combat what's going on with these construction prices, the trade schools, I think, are going to become a very viable option for students in the near future, because I think it's starting to get everybody's attention of, oh, okay, I can really make a living in that, or at least get a skill that I can work for a few years and then go into my own business or what have you. So anyway, we're solving all kinds of problems here on the Student Housing Insight podcast. Any other parting thoughts before we get into the interview, Chad?
No, I think the interview is I think fairly detailed and talks about a lot of the problems that we're dealing with on a daily basis, and it makes it really difficult to set budgets and make really good plans for your project. We always, after doing this for so many years, one of the first things we want to do is go back to historical data on what did we spend on the last project for whatever line item it is in the budget.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now the historical data is no good whatsoever. So we're sort of reinventing the wheel whenever we're putting budgets together now, and it's a moving target you're trying to hit.
Yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and hit play on this interview. And Chad, again, thanks for working with me on this podcast, and I look forward to having you back as we discuss other construction topics in the future.
Sounds good, Wes. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, great. All right, guys, here's the interview. Giny, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
Well, I appreciate you taking some time out to discuss construction pricing and tariffs and where everything is headed. But before we get into that, just give the audience a little bit of background, if you can, on both yourself and the company and the involvement you guys have had in student housing over the years.
Be glad to. As you know, my company is Construction Enterprises Incorporated, but we're better known in the industry just as CEI. And we are a third-party general contracting firm. We've been building multifamily for over 40 years, and that is our specialty. We do market rate projects, student housing projects, urban, mid-rise, anything in the multifamily market area, and we build all across the country. We are a traveling contractor, and we have kind of built our business model on working with clients that do repeat business, that build multiple projects, and we travel where they need us to go. That being said, that makes us prime to serve the student housing industry. Many of our clients are merchant builders,
right?
And we go where they need us. And we've been building student housing as long as we've been in business. We've built, good grief, almost $1 billion worth of student housing projects. Around 23,000 beds, and we've built from coast to coast. Right now, we're actually building a project in Corvallis, Oregon, and then getting ready to start something in Gainesville, Florida. Just turned over a couple of projects in Tallahassee, as well as in Mississippi, Oxford, and Starkville. So we've been pretty busy in the student housing market. It's been very good to us, and we are thankful to be there.
Well, and you guys have got a great reputation from everything that I've heard, and again, I appreciate you giving the time to be on the podcast today, as I know you guys are busy delivering a lot of projects and making sure a lot of projects are going to be delivered before students move in this year. So because of that, I know this isn't an easy time for you to put 30 minutes on the clock to talk to us, but there's a lot going on in the construction world these days. I got a letter from you when we started talking about this podcast, because it was pretty timely. It's something that you'd sent out to all of your clients about the lumber and steel tariffs and the type of increase. I believe I'm quoting you correctly, but there's been a 47% increase since September of last year of 2017. So, let's talk about materials first. What type of increases have you seen over the past year, and what are those increases due to? I know tariffs is going to be a big one, but just walk through that for our audience so everybody has an understanding of what's driving that cost.
Sure. Well, for us in particular, lumber is a big one. We don't do high-rise projects, so most everything that we do is wood frame. So lumber is key to our market, and I am just astounded at the rise in the price of lumber, in particular over this past year. The lumber market always fluctuates. We have different times of the year where it spikes a little bit and then it goes back down, and we usually can gauge that pretty well. But this past year has been like nothing we've ever seen. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we're getting so much lumber from Canada, and therein lies some of the trouble with the tariffs that are now on the table, and also supply. There's been such a high demand for lumber due to the multifamily market being so strong, both student housing and market rate. You also have the single family market which is huge. Exactly. And that's lumber that they need for that as well. So I think supply's been an issue. And again, like I said, the tariffs, we keep expecting every week, thinking maybe it'll go down a little bit. And actually last week it did just a tad, but when we get excited about that, the next week it spikes right back up. So it has been a challenge, to say the least.
Well, I know this is, trying to read the tea leaves, so to speak, but, specifically with lumber, is it a thing where the issue with the tariffs and then just the supply and demand have just got to equal out before this changes? Or do you think there's something that is more immediate? Do you think that it's, we're kind of going to be settling into this for the next couple of years?
Yes and yes. I think it may be a combination of both. As with anything, when prices go up, then when they start coming back down, they never go all the way back down. You just don't get it all back. So even when prices come back down, they're still going to be higher than probably we want them to be. That being said, the market is still strong right now. So what's the incentive for them to lower prices? It's kind of a catch-22.
What do you see with, we're coming in on the hurricane season? I mean, it's not even really started yet. And, that always ends up causing, we just had a few bad storms last year, but they were just devastating to Texas and Puerto Rico. What do you, specifically with lumber, what do you see happening for the rest of 2018? Any predictions on how much further this will go up?
My hope is that we have just about reached the peak. But I'm done making predictions. I mean, we used to be able to give somebody a pretty good ballpark of where costs are going to be and feel pretty comfortable that was going to hold, 6-9 months, a pretty good bit, pretty good ways out. But it's just not possible to do that anymore, because no one would have, a year ago, if you'd asked me that prices would be where they are now, I would have told you were crazy. Yeah. So I very cautiously now tell people, this is where prices are today, but I can't tell you where they're going to be 30 days from now. It's just that volatile. And as Chad knows, we're working on a deal together, and it's been a challenge to keep everything in line, and we need to get that thing started quickly, Chad, so we can stop the bleeding here.
So, Chad, you've got projects going on across the country, as Giny alluded to. You're spread out from Reno to Tennessee right now. What is it like, throughout the country? Is it? I'm sure it's probably not any better than what Giny's alluded to. But anything from your perspective, is there any other markets that are even worse because of maybe where that lumber is coming from?
Yeah, I think most of what I've built in the past has been here in the Southeast, and we deal with the increases from time to time. As Giny said, these are more than we've ever seen, and I think the supply and demand is a big part of that. Just because every major city you go into, there's tons of apartments being built, and even hotels are starting to go wood frame. But our project that we have in Reno has seemed to have even more fluctuation in pricing. And, we're about to go to contract with the general contractor there in Reno. And just trying to get to a final number has been probably one of the most difficult processes that I've had in trying to start any project. And in some cases, we're having to go to contract with the knowledge that, for example, insulation is projected to increase 9% per quarter, and they don't even put an end date on when that may stop. And for our project, that's around $50,000 a quarter, and the general contractor is not going to take on that risk. So we just, it's one of those things we have to deal with as we get to it. And it's been across the board, and especially in Reno. I mean, we're definitely seeing it here with steel, and even last year when the hurricane that hit around Houston, I ended up getting letters from PVC. Charlotte Pipe was sending letters out because we didn't realize, but Charlotte Pipe has two major PVC plants right by Houston that were impacted by the hurricane. Mm-hmm. So any of those things obviously affect the price, and then you throw in tariffs and stuff like that, then it's like Giny said, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen 15 to 30 days down the road at this point.
So, Giny, obviously it's not just lumber. I know you guys, I know you mentioned that you're not doing any high rises, but give me a little bit of background on steel as well, because I think everybody is familiar with the tariffs that the current administration put on steel. How is that done over the past year?
Well, we import our steel from Canada, Mexico, other areas of Europe, and this is it includes structural steel handrails, stairs, cables for post-tension slabs. There are a lot of areas that are impacted. Even though what we do is wood frame, we still use a lot of steel.
Right.
To be redundant there. But so obviously these tariffs, they're a threat. They're hanging over our head, and everybody is kind of poised, waiting to see how long they're going to last, how high they're going to go, and what the impact is going to be. And that's a little bit of an unknown right now. We had the 25% tariff that was enacted, and there are projections that it's going to go higher, but it's a bit of an unknown at this moment.
And I know, with domestic steel, obviously those stock prices went up, but did you see any decrease in the actual price of steel that's sourced in the U.S. versus abroad?
We're still a little bit too early. I'm not seeing that yet, but
gotcha.
Like I said, we do import so much, and it's a bit of an anomaly right now. I don't know how it's going to be impacted.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about the labor side, because there is a lot of development going on. And Chad, I think you said it's not a buyer's market or a seller's market. It's a sub in the development world. It's a developer's market, or it's a subs market. And right now, it is definitely a subcontractor's market, because they can pretty much choose and pick what jobs they want to do, and a lot of times that ends up, getting into causing some other issues, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Giny, I guess we'll start with you. What type of increases, are you seeing in labor over the past year?
Well, that's a whole nother topic, and it's increases, but it's also shortage of workers, and that's almost more critical than pricing even, because no matter what you're paying, you still got to have the labor on the job to do the job and to meet the schedule and to keep the project moving forward. And as everybody knows, and it's been said repeatedly, when we had the downturn, a lot of our labor force went back to their native homes, and they haven't come back as quickly. The market has, the market has just kind of gone crazy the last couple of years with product delivery and product being put into place. And the subs have been able to write their ticket, because we just do not have the labor, the everyday labor. I'm not talking about the highly skilled side of it. I'm talking about the framers, the drywallers, the painters. Those folks, it's very difficult to man a job, especially in student housing. In student housing, the schedule is everything. If you don't make your delivery date, I mean, it's a black mark on everybody. And the project itself, from a developer standpoint, could lose a whole year of revenue. So it is critical. Developers and contractors alike have had to rethink schedules. We've had to make sure that we have a little bit more time in order to deal on the issues that we know we're going to have to deal with. From a contractor standpoint, those labor intensive areas, we have to make sure when we go into a contract that we've got not only a subcontractor lined up, but we've got backup.
Yeah, you got to have a deep bench on top of.
Exactly right. And so it's tricky, and there's just a lot more risk going into it than there historically has been.
Yeah, so I hear developers and general contractors, talk all the time, and it's been a lot more recently where a sub ends up not showing up because they got something literally down the street or closer to where they live, where someone came in and said, look, I'll pay you double what you're getting over there. And obviously that's a huge threat to everything that you talked about. Is there anything, either you or Chad, I'm sure you got something to ring in here with as well, but what would you guys suggest in regards to how a developer can best protect themselves from that?
Well, I would say one of the things that we're doing a little bit differently, that if you take, the type of projects that we're building now, around 500 beds, those projects, I would say typically could be start and finished on an 18-month schedule, and we would normally start a project like that around February, March, April timeframe, to be finished for an August completion prior to the opening of our school starting back. And we've sort of changed our thinking on that just based on the labor shortages and needing more time and schedules. So, now what we would typically have an 18-month project, we're starting projects in June, July timeframe, and giving the contractor somewhere between 22 and 24 months to build that project. And, it relieves a little bit of the pressure on the contractor, and it minimizes a lot of the risk for not finishing on time. So it just, I think across the board, hopefully that changes as, like you mentioned before, as the supply starts to go down, then the subcontractors will be looking for more work instead of picking and choosing which projects they work on. And I think one of the problems we have is, building in different cities across the country. And when I was a contractor here in North Carolina, in the Southeast, I knew my subcontractors very well, and they were repeat subcontractors that we used over and over again on every project. But when you go into a new market like where we are in Reno, you've got a lot of things, the big Tesla plant being built out there, a lot of different large jobs that are being built, and you hear of stories of those guys coming to different job sites and offering more money per square foot or per piece directly right there on your job site. And your crews, like Giny said, needing to have that backup, those crews will find out they can make more money on another project. And, the next thing you know, they've packed up and moved on to a different project. That's I think that's another part of it as well.
Well, and let me add just a little bit of value to our listeners who are operators, property management companies within the space. As we're coming up on turn here in a few weeks, I've been in that situation where I've had an active property, a stabilized operational property, and there's something new being delivered to the market, and the last thing that happens on new construction is the cleaning. And when you're in a market that is where you've got a very short supply, where do you think those general contractors are going to go to try to find a last minute cleaner if their cleaning sub backed out? They're going to show up on your project, and hopefully those things have been vetted. But I'm here to warn people. One thing that I see being an issue this year is you may not even have, let's Chad, where you're at in, the Research Triangle area of North Carolina, between, with all the universities between Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill, if a new project's being delivered in any of those markets and there's an issue with cleaning subs, and you've got a lot of cleaning vendors that are in those areas that are already doing projects. You may have a project in Durham that is that's being, or you may not have a new project in Durham that's being delivered this year, but somebody who's delivering a new project in Raleigh may end up showing up in Durham and saying, "Hey, we've got new construction." And those vendors love new construction cleans compared to having to go into partially occupied student apartments and trying to clean that up. So just to put a warning out there, if you're a property manager, and even though you've got all of your RFPs and contracts signed off of, you need to make sure you're having that conversation with your subs that, if they leave you high and dry, you may not be using them next year. So,
and you hit on a point that I think bears repeating. It doesn't matter anymore what kind of relationship you have with a subcontractor. Used to loyalty. I mean, you knew if you had a contract with somebody, they were going to fulfill it. They were going to do everything they could to do so. We subcontract with a sub, but that sub hires the labor crews. And it doesn't matter how hard that sub may try. Sometimes it's out of their hands as to whether the labor crews show up today, if they show up on time, if they, and so someone that you've been able to count on for years, even though they still may have good intentions, they're not able to deliver, and you can't count on them being able to deliver like you used to be able to.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about these higher costs that the general contractors are looking at. What is there anything that this question is really to both of you guys, that developers and GCs are looking to in order to help mitigate some of these higher costs, where they're now finding themselves, and I'm talking about a current project that has already been funded and in the process of, and now all of a sudden, over the past year, lumber's gone up 47%, and the GC just says, look, we can't continue doing this at the original budget that we projected, or we're going to have to go up. What are you guys seeing to help mitigate those increases? Is there anything that
how to offset the cost?
Yeah, I mean, have you seen anybody do anything to mitigate those costs that you think is worth sharing with other developers and folks that are that may be facing that same issue as well?
Usually, that is, we try to vet that out as much as possible before we sign a contract. We try to anticipate what our risk is going to be. We work with the developer. You have the dreaded VE terminology, but we do work with the developers to try to see if there are areas that we can get some cost out without losing the integrity of the project or the design. I know developers from their side, they're going to maximize the rents wherever they can, but rents can only go so high. Once the project gets started, then in most cases the risk is on us to make it come in according to the contract, according to what we have contracted to do. It's very difficult sometimes, and like I said, we have to go into projects with backup. We have to know how we're going to supplement subs when that issue comes up. If there are material items that we do know have a risk of going up during the course of the project, then that's something that we work out the risk with the developer in our contract terms. There are some places where we're willing to share the risk. There are other places where we just can't. But it all needs to be handled as cleanly as possible during the contract negotiations, so that once the job gets going, everybody knows what we're doing, and it's just, everybody's on the same page, and the goal is to get the project delivered. I'm not real sure if that answered your question, but I'm not certain that there's a good answer to your question.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. I don't know that there is a good answer, or that there's an answer at all. Chad, anything from your standpoint on the development side that maybe you're considering as a project, as you're starting to see increases that weren't there originally, that obviously you got to pay them or the project's not going to be delivered.
Right.
Where you're having to get creative, the team's having to get creative and figure something else out.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned a couple of things that we're actually doing for the project in Reno, where it seems to be impacting us more than anywhere else at this point. One thing we're looking at is certain materials that like insulation, for example. I mean, what we would like to do is go ahead and buy all the insulation. But if you start looking at how much insulation that is that goes into one of these buildings, you would have a huge warehouse to try to store this stuff in. But in some cases, you're able to do that and have the contractor, rent some warehouse space or something like that for certain materials that may be going up to go ahead and buy now. Another thing that we're doing is, because like we mentioned before, we always get the letters and the notifications when the prices are going up. The phone usually doesn't ring when prices start going down. So what we're trying to work on with the contractor out in Reno is, I mentioned the Tesla plant, and the Tesla plant is one of the causes of labor shortages out there. And before our project finishes, that Tesla plant's going to be complete, which is going to relieve a lot the pressure to the labor
question
market.
Is Tesla still going to be around by that time?
But we want to, I guess, maintain the opportunity with the general contractor to, we want him to go ahead and issue subcontracts to his subcontractors and go ahead and get folks locked in. But as we see things starting to relieve, 6 months, 12 months from now, we want to have the opportunity to have them rebid certain trades, and think about such stuff like sheetrock. I mean, it'll be a year from now before we start hanging sheetrock in some of those parts of those buildings. So that's one example of maybe the drywall market is up now when we're locking in, and we want the opportunity to revisit that prior to starting that trade. And, so we want to be able to do that on different, with different trades.
So it's really just getting in at a granular level and analyzing kind of every little cost line item and saying, okay, what else is going in the market? Are there any creative strategies that we may think of? That's really what you're kind of getting at, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because like Giny said, I mean, from a general contractor standpoint, once you go to contract, you're sort of locked in, and it's up to the contractor to help mitigate those risks with price increases. And I'm sure their contracts with the subcontractors address that. And we're locking in at a certain price, and this is the price that you're going to do your work for. The problem is when we get something, like we're discussing for our Reno project now on insulation, there's no way to manage that. The contractor is not going to take on that risk. So it's one of those things that, again, we're probably not going to need insulation for somewhere between 8 and 12 months from now. So it's, we have to go to contract knowing that there's the potential there for that material increase. And then we just have to watch that market and see, are the increases actually happening? Is something happening to make those go down? And if they are going down, then, we want to be able to recoup those, come back from those increases.
Gotcha. So, guys, kind of last question here. Let's put cost and expenses completely aside for this next question. Is there anything on the technology front, either from a material standpoint or from just, a project management kind of application standpoint, that you think developers should consider when choosing a GC?
Chad, I'll let you go first on that one.
Well, and the ideas that come to my mind are more after the project has started, like you're mentioning about the photo documentation. The other thing I can think of is just document control and how the contractor manages all the different communications and RFIs and just really managing the project with. I'm thinking something like Procore or different communication type technology that keeps record of things and without giving an advertisement for a company.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. There are definitely programs out there that enable the exchange of documents to be a lot more efficient. RFIs, information and tracking, plan changes. But in that respect, technology has really helped us a lot from a GC standpoint. Our field guys can walk around and have a set of plans on their iPad rather than having to either carry around a big roll with them or run back to the job trailer every time they need to look up something. And that's helped tremendously. That's been a real boost for us. But, at the end of the day, it's whatever works to enable you and your team to get the job done. And, there are different strokes for different folks. And as long as you're delivering, I think technology is good and it needs to be implemented where it can be, but it's not the be all end all. The guys have got to work and get the job done.
Yeah. Anything from any advances on any of the materials, maybe any type of new flooring or anything that you guys have seen that you think is. I know the interior designers probably have more of a say so in that, but anything that you guys are seeing from that standpoint that, for example, Chad, I know on the project in Knoxville, you guys used modular is not the right word, but for the parking deck, it was actually everything was poured as far as the concrete off site. Is that the best way to say that? Or
yeah, it's a precast concrete. It's fabricated in pieces off site and then brought in, and speeds the production up of the parking deck for sure, because they basically come in and that particular parking deck, 7 stories, I think close to around 500 spaces, and from start to finish, from the time they showed up until the time they finished building that parking deck, was about, I think, 8 weeks, versus if you were forming and pouring those walls on site, it ties the site up and extends your overall schedule. So yeah, that's one. Thinking about finishes, one of the other things that we look at is, how can we help speed up the production, and looking at flooring, for example, where a lot of times we have carpet in bedrooms and tile in bathrooms and vinyl plank in the living spaces. We're looking at trying to make that consistent throughout the units and just use like a vinyl plank everywhere. And then it reduces the transitions. It reduces the time, the different cycles that the subcontractor has to enter into that apartment, so he can go in and knock an entire apartment out and be finished, instead of, coming in like we're doing in Knoxville and putting sheet vinyl in the bathrooms, vinyl plank in the living spaces, and then we wait, and just before we start finishing wrapping those units up, we come in and put the carpet in. So now they've made 3 trips into the unit instead of 1. So that's just one example of things that can be done to try to help speed up the processing.
Gotcha. Well, guys, I appreciate it. Again, thanks, Giny, for your time, and Chad, has been great. It's been great having you as a as a co-host on this, guest co-host on this subject as well. And I think it will certainly go to I think most developers and general contractors that probably listen to the show know most of what you guys are talking about, but I do think for some of those that are on the operations side, getting a little bit better understanding of what's happening in the world of development and construction and the cost involved, I think we're all better for it. So thanks for sharing that with our audience, and look forward to talking to you guys again.
Thank you, Wesley. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, there you have it, folks. I hope this helps explain some of the things in regards to construction costs. Obviously, if you are a seasoned developer, you understand a lot of this and know what's going on, but I wanted to give some insight to the audience members who are not in the development world day in and day out. And for those folks, I hope you really found some value in this. Again, thanks to Giny and Chad and for their help on this. And a big thanks again to our sponsor, AUS Furniture. You can check them out at www.theausway.com. Also, don't forget to go to our website, studenthousinginsight.com. Again, that's studenthousinginsight.com, and enroll in the SHI community. When you go to the website, it's up in the upper right-hand corner. We've got some amazing announcements that are coming up, including our first ever conference, which we will be getting into on the next podcast episode. So make sure, in order to get the latest information, make sure that you go to the SHI community page and register there. All right, guys, I appreciate it again for listening, and I hope I've brought you a lot of value. We'll talk next time.